In the remote wilderness of Arizona, 62-year-old Marcus Rodriguez never planned on becoming the keeper of 5 bobcats. But when grief consumed him after losing his beloved wife Emma, fate intervened on a bitter February morning. A desperate mother bobcat, trapped and dying, led him to 5 orphaned kittens no bigger than his fist. What began as a rescue mission became something extraordinary, a bond that defied every wildlife manual ever written. Whenever life weighed heavy on Marcus's shoulders, he'd set up the wooden table in the backyard with 6 camping chairs, 5 glasses of milk, 1 beer. Tonight was one of those nights. Marcus settled into his chair. He popped open his beer and waited. Somehow, the bobcats always knew and gathered in their seats. At their nightly council table, all 5 bobcats were now focused on Marcus, with beer for him and milk for them. 5 old bobcats wait to hear his decision. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Marcus Rodriguez had never planned on becoming the keeper of 5 bobcats. Life, as he'd learned over his 62 years, had a peculiar way of choosing your path for you, weaving destinies from threads of chance and circumstance that no human mind could have predicted. It started 30 years ago, on a bitter February morning when the Arizona high country was still locked in winter's grip. Marcus had been 42 then, his hair still more black than gray, his hands steady despite the trembling in his heart. Emma had been gone for only 3 months. Cancer had taken her swiftly, mercilessly, leaving him alone in the cabin they'd built together with their own hands. Every log, every stone in the fireplace, every carefully planted wildflower in the garden held her ghost. That morning, he'd forced himself out for firewood, anything to escape the suffocating silence of the cabin. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he made his way to the woodpile. And that's when he heard it. A sound that wasn't quite a cry, wasn't quite a growl, but something desperate and primal that spoke directly to the grief howling in his own chest. Following the sound through a thicket of manzanita and pine, he found her. A female bobcat, her tawny coat matted with blood, her breathing shallow and labored. A steel trap, illegal on this land, had mangled her hind leg. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. In them, he saw not the wild fury he expected, but a mother's desperate plea. "Easy, Mama," he whispered, his voice rough from months of disuse. Living alone, he'd almost forgotten the sound of his own voice. "I'm going to help you." It took him 2 hours to free her, using tools from his truck, speaking constantly in low, soothing tones, partly to calm her, partly to remind himself he was still capable of gentleness. She never once tried to attack him, though her claws could have shredded him like paper. When he finally carried her to his truck, wrapped in his jacket, she was barely conscious. Dr. Patricia Hawkins, the veterinarian in town, did everything she could. Marcus stayed through the surgery, through the long night that followed, holding vigil as he had for Emma in her final days. But sometimes, love and skill aren't enough to cheat death. "Marcus," Dr. Hawkins said softly as the bobcat's breathing stilled, "I'm so sorry." He nodded, unable to speak past the fresh grief that mingled with the old. But then Dr. Hawkins grabbed his arm. "Marcus, wait. She was nursing." The search took them 3 hours, following tracks back from where Marcus had found the mother. The den was hidden beneath a fallen pine, protected by a natural cave of roots and earth. Inside, 5 tiny forms huddled together, mewing pitifully. Their eyes were still sealed shut, their spotted coats fuzzy with newborn fur. They couldn't have been more than 3 days old. "The rehabilitation center is full," Dr. Hawkins said, cradling two of the kittens while Marcus held the other three. "The state budget cuts. We just don't have space or staff." "I'll take them," Marcus heard himself say. The words came from somewhere deep, from the part of him that couldn't bear to see another family torn apart. Dr. Hawkins studied him carefully. "Marcus, this isn't a small commitment. They'll need feeding every 2 hours for the first few weeks. Special formula. Eventually raw meat. And even if you raise them, they're wild animals. They'll need to be released." "I understand," he said, though he understood nothing except that these 5 orphans needed what he had to give. Time, attention, and a heart that needed something to care for before it shriveled entirely. The first month was a blur of sleepless nights and tiny bottles. Marcus set up a nursery in Emma's old craft room, the space she'd filled with quilts and watercolors, now home to heating pads and formula supplies. He named them after playing cards. It had been Emma's favorite game, poker, and she'd been teaching him Texas Hold'em in those last weeks when she was too weak for much else. Ace was the largest, even then showing signs of the magnificent cat he'd become. King and Queen were clearly from the same corner of the womb, their markings mirror images of each other. Jack was the climber, always trying to scale the sides of their box before his legs could properly support him. And Deuce? Little Deuce was the runt, requiring extra feedings and constant warmth, fighting for every breath in those early days. Marcus documented everything in a journal, partly for veterinary records, partly because writing had become his way of talking to Emma. "Day 12, he'd write. "Deuce finally hit 2 pounds. You would have loved how he purrs. Sounds like your old sewing machine. Ace opened his eyes today. They're amber, like that necklace I gave you for our 20th anniversary." As the weeks turned to months, the kittens grew from helpless bundles into miniature predators. Marcus converted his screened porch into a halfway house, large enough for them to practice hunting with toy mice and feather wands, safe enough to protect them from the dangers of the wild. Dr. Hawkins visited weekly, amazed at their progress and Marcus's dedication. "You know," she said one day, watching 4-month-old Queen stalk a toy with lethal precision, "most people would have given up by now, or gotten too attached to let them go." Marcus nodded, not mentioning the cold dread that filled him at the thought of release day. These 5 had given him purpose, had filled his days with their needs and his nights with their company. In caring for them, he'd found a way to care for himself. Release day came in early autumn, when the cats were 6 months old. The wildlife officials had approved a soft release on Marcus's property, 50 acres of wilderness that bordered national forest land. Perfect bobcat territory, they said. Perfect for 5 young cats to learn the ways of the wild while still having a safety net. Marcus opened the door to their enclosure that morning, his throat tight. "Go on," he said, voice rough. "World's waiting for you." Ace was the first to venture out, followed by his siblings. They scattered into the underbrush with the fluid grace of their kind, and Marcus went inside to avoid watching them disappear. He made coffee with shaking hands, cleaned their empty enclosure, tried not to think about the silence returning to his life. That evening, as he sat on his porch with a beer, his first in 6 months, he heard a familiar chirping sound. Deuce sat at the edge of the forest watching him. Within minutes, all 5 had emerged, approaching the porch with cautious curiosity. "You're supposed to be wild," Marcus told them, but he was already heading to the kitchen for the chicken he'd been thawing for his own dinner. This became their pattern. The cats would hunt. He'd find evidence of their kills, saw them stalking prey with increasing skill. But every evening they returned. After a week, Marcus gave up fighting it. After a month, he accepted what Dr. Hawkins laughingly called the most successful failed release in Arizona wildlife history. "They're wild," she assured him during one of her visits, watching King and Jack wrestle in the yard while maintaining a respectful distance from her. "They hunt, they maintain territory, they're healthy and strong. They just include you in their territory." Over the years, the relationship evolved into something unique, something that defied every wildlife manual ever written. The cats maintained their wild instincts. No visitor could approach them, and Marcus never tried to domesticate them. But with him, they showed a trust that bordered on the miraculous. The ritual with the table started by accident. 5 years into their arrangement, Marcus had received divorce papers from his brother. The family business was being dissolved, relationships severed over money and old grudges. Overwhelmed, he'd set up a camping table in the backyard, planning to go through legal documents with a beer to steady his nerves. One by one, the cats had appeared, each claiming a chair around the table. Without thinking, Marcus had fetched 5 bowls of milk, goat's milk, which they tolerated better than cows. And there they sat, his council of 5, while he poured out his troubles to the evening air. "The thing is," he'd told them that night, "David was always jealous that Dad left me the land. Never understood that I'd rather have had a brother than an inheritance." Queen had tilted her head, her expression so clearly one of feline disdain for human pettiness that Marcus had actually laughed. Ace had reached across the table, those massive paws surprisingly gentle, and patted Marcus's hand. From then on, whenever life grew heavy, the table came out. The cats somehow always knew, appearing from their various haunts with uncanny timing. Marcus talked through Emma's birthday, through the anniversary of her death, through health scares and lonely holidays. The cats listened with the patience of creatures who understood grief and survival in ways humans could only guess at. 20 years passed. 25. The cats aged more slowly than Marcus, their wild diet and active lifestyle keeping them vital while his joints stiffened and his hair went white. Visitors, the rare ones he allowed, were astounded to learn the cats' ages. Bobcats in captivity live maybe 15 years. Dr. Hawkins, now nearing retirement herself, marveled. In the wild, 12 if they're lucky. These 5, it's like they're writing their own rules. "Maybe it's the beer consultation sessions," Marcus joked. But privately, he wondered if it wasn't something more. Love, perhaps. Purpose. The mysterious bonds that form when 2 species decide the rules don't apply to them. Which brought him to tonight. Tyler's phone call had shaken him more than he cared to admit. His grandson meant well. The boy, though at 35 hardly a boy anymore, had always been kind-hearted. But moving to Phoenix? Leaving this land where Emma's ashes were scattered beneath the ponderosa pines? Leaving the 5 souls who'd saved him as much as he'd saved them? Marcus set up the table as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of peach and lavender. He settled into his chair, his joints protesting more than they used to, and popped open his beer. As always, he didn't need to call them. Ace arrived first, moving with the stately grace of an elder statesman. At 29 years old, ancient for a bobcat, he still commanded respect from every creature in the forest. He settled into the chair to Marcus's immediate right, accepting his milk with dignified appreciation. Queen sauntered in next, making her usual production of circling her chair before sitting. Even in her advanced age, she maintained her diva status. Her coat had lightened over the years, giving her an almost ethereal appearance in the fading light. King and Jack arrived together, as they had for nearly 3 decades. The bonded pair moved more slowly now, Jack's old hunting injury giving him a slight limp, but their devotion to each other remained unchanged. They settled into their chairs with contented sighs. Deuce made his entrance last, still the mischief maker despite his years. He attempted to steal a sip from Jack's glass, earning a gentle swat, before claiming his own seat with exaggerated innocence. "So," Marcus began, and 5 pairs of eyes, still bright, still wild, still trusting, locked onto him. "Tyler called today, my grandson. Remember him? The one who used to try to ride you like horses when he was little?" Deuce's tail twitched in remembered indignation. Even after 20 years, some indignities were not forgotten. "He wants me to move to Phoenix," Marcus continued, his voice catching slightly. "Says I'm getting too old to live alone out here. Says it's not safe, me being isolated with 5 wild cats." The word wild hung in the air like a question. Queen stopped mid-lick, milk dripping from her whiskers, her expression clearly communicating her opinion of this nonsense. "I know, right?" Marcus chuckled despite the tightness in his chest. 30 years we've been together. 30 years. You 5 have seen me through Emma's death, through my heart surgery, through that broken leg when you all took turns bringing me rabbits. He smiled at the memory. "I never did figure out how you knew I couldn't hunt for myself. But every morning there'd be a fresh rabbit on the porch. You took shifts, like nurses." Ace stood up on his chair, placing his massive front paws on the table. In a move that would have terrified anyone who didn't know him, he leaned forward and gently headbutted Marcus's beer bottle. "Hey now, you know the rules. Milk for you, beer for me." But Marcus was smiling through the tears that threatened. "Remember when Dr. Peterson visited last month? Poor man nearly fainted when you all surrounded him. I tried to explain you were just saying hello, but he was convinced he was about to become dinner." King and Jack had started their synchronized grooming ritual, taking turns licking each other's faces between sips of milk. The sight of them, still devoted after all these years, made Marcus's heart ache with a peculiar mixture of joy and sorrow. "The thing is," Marcus continued, watching his unusual family, "Tyler means well. Phoenix has good hospitals, grocery stores that deliver, neighbors who could check on me. All sensible things for a man my age. Hell, I'll be 83 next month. Most folks my age are in retirement homes, playing bingo and complaining about the food." Queen abandoned her milk entirely and padded over to Marcus. In a display of affection that would have astonished any wildlife biologist, she rubbed against his legs, purring with the volume of a small engine. Her purr had always been the loudest, a rumbling declaration of contentment that could be heard across the yard. "But they don't have you 5 in Phoenix, do they?" Marcus asked softly. "They don't have this table where I've spilled 30 years of secrets. They don't have the sunrise through the pines, or Emma's garden that you've helped me maintain. Yes, Deuce, I know it's you who keeps the deer out of the roses." As if understanding the gravity of the moment, even Deuce abandoned his usual restlessness. All 5 cats were now focused entirely on Marcus, creating a tableau that spoke of bonds beyond species, beyond logic, beyond the careful categories humans use to organize the world. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Tyler. "Grandpa, please just think about it. I worry about you. What if something happens? What if you fall? What if the cats? The unfinished sentence hung there, full of urban fears and misunderstandings. What if the cats, what, turned on him? After 30 years of mutual devotion? Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity. He looked at his counsel. Ace had resumed his regal pose but kept one paw stretched across the table toward Marcus, just close enough to touch if needed. King and Jack had moved their chairs closer together, their shoulders touching in that way that spoke of a lifetime of companionship. Queen was still purring against his legs, her eyes half closed in contentment. And Deuce, unpredictable, beloved Deuce, had done something he'd never done before. The smallest of the five had climbed onto the table itself, carefully stepping between the milk glasses with the grace that even age couldn't diminish. He sat directly in front of Marcus, and for a long moment, man and Bobcat simply looked at each other. In Deuce's golden eyes, Marcus saw wild places and secret knowledge, but also something else. A fierce, unwavering loyalty that took his breath away. "You know," Marcus said softly, reaching out to stroke the fur between Deuce's ears. "Emma would have loved this. All of it. She always said I needed looking after, and here you five have been doing it for 3 decades. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Tyler, this time with a link to a nice assisted living facility in Scottsdale. "They even allow pets," the message said hopefully. Marcus looked at the link, then at his 5 companions. Pets. As if these magnificent creatures who had shared his grief and joy, who had taught him about loyalty and wild grace, who had given him purpose when he thought his life was over, could be reduced to such a simple word. "Well," Marcus said, typing his response with one hand while continuing to stroke Deuce with the other. "I guess that settles it." His message to Tyler was gentle but firm. "Come visit anytime. Bring your kids. The council would love to meet them properly. They're quite civilized with family. But this is home. This is where I belong. Where we belong. Some families are born, some are chosen, and some are just mysterious gifts from a universe that knows what we need better than we do. I have 5 reasons to stay right here, and 30 years of proof that sometimes the best life is the one that makes no sense to anyone else." As the stars emerged in the darkening Arizona sky, Marcus and his 5 Bobcats remained at their table. The milk glasses were empty, the beer was warm, but nobody moved. The night sounds of the forest began. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through pine needles. This was their symphony, the soundtrack to a life lived on the margins of the possible. Deuce finally broke the spell by attempting to knock over Marcus's beer bottle, earning a gentle bop on the nose. 30 years, Marcus laughed, and you still haven't learned any table manners. But as all 5 cats followed him back to the house, walking in their usual formation, Ace leading with patriarchal dignity, the twins flanking like an honor guard, Queen beside him matching his pace, and Deuce bringing up the rear, occasionally pouncing at shadows. Marcus knew with bone-deep certainty that he'd made the right choice. Tomorrow, he'd call Tyler back, maybe invite him for a visit. It had been too long since the great-grandchildren had seen their unusual family members. Little Amanda, Tyler's youngest, had the same gentle way with animals that Emma had possessed. Maybe she'd be the one to carry on this strange legacy, this impossible bond between human and wild. But that was tomorrow's thought. Tonight, Marcus climbed the porch steps slowly, 5 shadows flowing around him like water. Inside the cabin, he'd put out their evening meal, raw venison from a local rancher who understood their arrangement. They'd eat, then settle in their various spots around the house. Ace by the fireplace, King and Jack on the old sofa Emma had reupholstered twice, Queen in the window seat, and Deuce wherever he could cause the most gentle chaos. Some might call him a foolish old man, choosing wild animals over urban convenience. The state wildlife department had long since given up trying to understand their arrangement, simply classifying it as an anomaly of mutual benefit. His few neighbors thought him eccentric but harmless. Tyler worried he was delusional, but Marcus knew better. He knew that love came in many forms, that family didn't always match the pictures and greeting cards, and that sometimes the universe sent exactly what you needed in the most unexpected packages. 30 years ago, 5 orphaned kittens had needed him. What he hadn't known then was how much he'd needed them. As he settled into his armchair with a book, Queen immediately claiming his lap despite being twice the size of any reasonable lap cat, Marcus reflected on the strange, beautiful journey that had brought them all here. Emma would have been 91 this year. He liked to think she'd have spent these decades sitting at that table too, probably spoiling Deuce even worse than Marcus did, definitely taking thousands of photos that no one outside their family would quite believe. "We did all right, didn't we, Em?" he murmured to the night. "Found our way through the grief to something, well, something impossible and perfect." Queen's purr rumbled through his bones like an answer. Outside, an owl called again, and somewhere in the darkness, the desert came alive with its nocturnal business. But inside the cabin, in a circle of lamplight and contentment, an old man and 5 ancient bobcats proved that sometimes the best families were the ones that made no sense at all. And at a table in the backyard, 6 empty chairs waited for the next evening's council, for the next pouring out of human troubles to patient wild ears, for the next chapter in a story that had already defied every odd placed against it. Some stories, Marcus thought as sleep began to claim him. Queen's weight warm on his lap, and the comforting sounds of his family settling in for the night around him, were too strange for fiction. But that didn't make them any less true, or any less filled with love.